The button on the top of your baseball cap is there purely for aesthetic purposes. By the way, this little thing has a name. Professionals call it a squatcho. Its initial function was to hold the four panels of the cap together. As hat making improved, the panels stopped needing it to hold together, and squatcho was removed. But hats didn't look the same without it. Soon after, the squatcho returned due to popular demand. Originally, high-heeled shoes weren't intended for galas and proms. Back in the 10th century, horse riding was pretty tough with flat-soled shoes, and many riders' feet would constantly fall out of the stirrups. Higher heels helped deal with that problem. The grip was much firmer with them, and they grew in popularity. It wasn't long before they became a fashion accessory to match stylish outfits. Notable people wouldn't want to be seen without them. Riding a horse with fancy heels was the equivalent of owning a luxurious sports car. Even though heels were worn mainly by men at the start, ladies picked up on the iconic trend in the 17th century. It's been one of the biggest ever since. In ancient Rome, salt was so precious that people even called it white gold. With scorching heat and no fridges, its purpose was to preserve food, mainly meat and fish. As a bonus, it made everything tastier. Sal, which is salt in Latin, was used instead of money to pay salaries. Here is where the word salary originated. Rice is the oldest cultivated food in human history. Its origins as wild grass started in a small valley around 15,000 years ago in Southeast Asia. Today, it's served globally as a staple diet and popular ingredient to 3.5 billion people. It would be difficult to imagine a world without video calls you use through your phone camera or laptop. The technology has helped game-changing innovations like working from home. Still, video calls' original purpose is far from how we use them today. The technology was introduced to confirm if the coffee was still in a pot. In 1993, researchers at the University of Cambridge found it frustrating when they took a break to get a cup of coffee, only to find that the pot was empty. So, they invented a device to monitor it and hooked up a camera that provided their computer with a live stream of the coffee pot. Thanks to these researchers, we can work in pajamas now. We know Albert Einstein for various achievements, but there's something he co-invented that goes overlooked. Together with his student, he invented a modified refrigerator. It's not like the ones we use today. In the 1920s, fridges weren't quite as safe as they produced poisonous gases. He wanted to create a safer version that didn't require electricity, without moving parts, and only needed a heat source to operate. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough funding, so the project dried up. Later, in the 1950s, electric fridges became popular. But in 2008, engineers from Oxford University revived this retro design. They're still working on it, but once they finish, the Einstein fridge will come in handy for rural areas without power and people who want to live off the grid. That random QWERTY design doesn't make things easier. In the 1870s, Christopher Sholes invented a layout that ensured typing was twice as fast. But with commonly used letters next to each other, it was a bit too fast, and the machines constantly jammed. So, he then developed the QWERTY design. It forced typists to adopt a pecking style. This way, they would search for a letter and slowly type with their index fingers. The keyboards remain unchanged even today, and people all over the world have somehow adapted to them. The plastic end of your shoelace is an aglet, and people have used it since ancient Rome. Sure thing, they had no plastic back then, so those aglets were made of stone, glass, or even metal. Extra wealthy people could accessorize their shoes with precious metals like brass or silver. What came first, the TV or the remote control? The technology that functions in the remote is older by several decades. In 1898, Nikola Tesla created a machine to control mechanical devices with radio waves. Initially, he tried selling the idea of a radio waves device operating I/O through remote-controlled boats, but the potential buyers were not interested. He was way ahead of his time, as remote controls were finally used with televisions in 1956. As engineer Percy Spencer initially invented something brilliant in 1945, he was working on a new vacuum tube, the magnetron, which was used with early radar systems. While working on the project, he found that the chocolate in his pocket had melted. Realizing the heating potential of the magnetron, he used it on corn kernels, which turned into popcorn. Then, he tried testing it with eggs, but things got a bit messy. So once the yolk was washed away, he built a metal box, keeping the energy within, and the first microwave oven was built. In 1733, a duke in England requested William Kent, an architect, to make a traveling device for his kids. William accepted and built the first ever stroller, but nobody had to push it. Instead of handles, it was built like a carriage and pulled by a goat or a small pony. Only a few were made as it was pricey. More than 100 years later, in 1848, the first stroller with push handles became available and more affordable. Police are often associated with donuts, and there is actually a reason why. During the 1950s in the USA, police officers that worked night shifts found it hard to locate anywhere open for a midnight snack. Donut shops at this time were family-owned. They were working hard throughout the night, providing fresh donuts for the coming day. The shops were vulnerable at night, becoming the perfect relationship: nourishment for the police and extra protection for the shops. Popping bubble wrap is an excellent source of relaxation, and it's also helpful with delicate packages. In 1957, two engineers glued together two shower curtains, trapping the air bubbles between. This is how the first bubble wrap was made. The result they were looking for was a sort of textured wallpaper. Still, it didn't go well on the market. Sometime later, they tried to sell it as insulation for greenhouses, and once again, they failed. Everything changed in 1960 when IBM needed to ship delicate computer parts. The bubble wrap was perfect, and they continued to collaborate. Using maps with your phone has become a far easier way to navigate, but the old-fashioned handheld maps were once the only option, creating a competitive industry. So much so that map makers would draw in phantom settlements to avoid rivals stealing from them. These fake towns were called a copyright trap. However, one of these fake settlements became real. Agloe in New York was drawn into a map by General Drafting Co. Another competing map maker had also included this town on their own, and the copyright trap was sprung. But in court, they found that in 1950, a general store had actually been built there. And the owner assumed that Agloe was a real area based on the map, so he named the shop after it. So there was no violation found, as technically Agloe was real, thanks to that general store. In 1943, Vesta Stout from Illinois was working with securing parcels. She was disappointed with the poor paper tape, as it would fall apart when wet. So she asked her boss to try to make waterproof tape. Her request was ignored, but she wrote a letter to President Roosevelt with an idea of how to make a better tape. Not only did she explain her concept, but she also provided it with detailed designs. He approved the idea and ordered the changes. The new tape was so helpful for freight transport that everyone wanted it, and they started selling it at hardware stores. In the 1950s, many people would wrap air ducts, and it was then deceptively named duct tape. Still, the adhesive on the sticky side wasn't suitable for cold and hot temperatures, which caused the tape to fall off. Despite this, people continued to use that tape for almost everything else.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.